taking more than 30 seconds to say so glad to see you and to help us kick off this spring BUENO Lunchtime Speaker Series. We have Alison Boardman, who's going to share some of her work on her Composing Our World project. And thank you for sharing your work with us, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Nellie, for inviting me. I have to say before I even get started that this is a project that is so exciting for me and for the teachers and the people that work on it. And when I reflect on the difference between this work and previous work I've done, I think I have often heard teachers say this was a really helpful professional development. I feel engaged. My students are learning. When I walk into classrooms, I sometimes see energy. And that feels completely in a different league than what has happened with some of the teachers who have worked on this project. And we have seen teachers who have said, and I will sprinkle some quotes throughout because it was hard to choose, but things like, I was going to leave the classroom and now I'm going to stay. This idea of reinvigorating the educator through the different methods I hope that I'll share today are what really drives me and what excites me. So I have for you this blob tree. I don't know if anyone has ever seen it before. And so what you do is you just look at the blobs and you think about what blob you are. So just do that if you haven't had a chance. And then just turn to the person next to you. It looks like almost everybody has someone. Just tell them, you really have, 20 seconds. Just tell them, and I'll model for you. I'm 14 because I think I'm getting somewhere, but I'm not there yet, and I see that as a support, and that support is all of the people that I work with, and my family, and my colleagues here. So I'm getting where I'm going, but I do have a little support getting there. That's why I'm number 14. Okay, so turn to the person next to you, and you can just tell them who you are. So finish up your quick conversation and bring your attention back to your yard. So a couple of things that I had noticed that you might also notice is that the room was very quiet. And when you are able to share what blob you are, I hear conversation, I see some smiles, I see a little bit of laughter. And I think these kinds of warm-ups in classrooms with kids are really important. And one of the things that we're learning on our team is how important they are for adults. So I would say that almost every meeting that we have, either with teachers or even with just our research team, we try to do some kind of a check-in. It might relate to, what are you feeling good about the project? It might be share a high and a low. It gives people an opportunity to share something pressing that's going on in their life. It can be really short. It does not need to take 40 minutes of a 45-minute class or meeting. It can be 5 minutes. And so this is a piece attending to the social and emotional needs of adults who are working with children is something that really grounds the work we're doing and hopefully grounded us just a little bit today. So here we are. So my focus for today, gosh, there's so many exciting things to talk about, so I'm hoping I can open the door and you all can come to me and say, tell me more about this, or let me ask you some questions, or bounce ideas off each other. I'm going to talk a little bit about the model that we use at Codesign for creating this Compose Our World year-long course. I'll talk a bit about the teacher support that we have been developing and that we are trying right now in Michigan and in Colorado, so we've got some distance learning going on. I'll talk a little bit about our research design and give you a few results, and also share with you some of the really just interesting research questions that a variety of our team members are looking into, and also some next steps. We have a big team, And it's a multidisciplinary team. And I share it this way to honor all of our team members, past and the ones who are working with us today, and the teachers, of course, but also to point out to you that one of the things that makes this project so special is that we, even in the School of Education, come from EECD and the learning sciences and literacy. Antero Garcia is in learning sciences at Stanford, but previously he was in English education. We have a member on our leadership team who is an educational technologist and a librarian. And having all of those different people come together is important because this is a project that's about project-based learning. And I will tell you that before I started this project 4 years ago, I really wasn't an expert at all in project-based learning, and I hadn't really done so much of it in my classroom. But what I brought to the team was an interest in equity, in working with kids with diverse language and learning needs, working in general education classrooms, and really interested in teacher growth and development and working alongside teachers. And so I brought that as a PI, and Joe Pullman, the other PI, really brought a very strong foundation in project-based learning and in authenticity. And all of our team members have special areas of expertise, including, and maybe even more so, the graduate students who are working on the project. So we are really happy to have all of us here. So what's the purpose? So students do not, this is no surprise, always experience classes that inspire or even engage them to think and act in deep ways that will advance their knowledge, skills, and engagement. And we really are worried about this, and our project is in 9th grade. So you can imagine kids coming out of middle school and into 9th grade, and they already have these ideas, many of them, about who they are as learners. I hate to read. I'm not good at school. I'm great at school. And they all wind up together, often without knowing each other, and they're launched into 9th grade with all of these assumptions about who they are in the world, and we wanted to kind of crack that open. We wanted to say 9th grade is a really amazing time for kids to have a different experience in school so that they could perhaps compose themselves in slightly new ways and be aware of their possibilities for revision of who they are along the way. There's not a lot of research on project-based learning in English language arts, so that was an interest of ours, and we thought that PBL was a nice entry point into these things that are so important for us, and we really care about teachers and how they experience curriculum and how they experience professional development in mostly negative and ineffective ways. So, what we wanted to do was use a Codesign model to develop this year-long course that was emotionally and intellectually engaging for all students. So one of the things we were really clear about is we developed a course and we invite teachers who teach pre-IB and pre-AP classes with teachers who teach special education inclusion classrooms, with teachers who are in bilingual settings or working with a lot of emergent bilingual learners, because they push each other. Why, my kids can't do this. Yes, they can. Why can't they? So having that diversity in our teachers and in our research team was really important. So Codesign, for those of you who are not familiar with it, it's often a component of design-based implementation research. It engages educators and researchers in designing, adapting, and testing curriculum materials together. So often what happens, and what my experience had been in the past, is you might create something with your researcher friends, and you try it in the classroom and you ask for feedback from teachers. You might have a focus group, you might have them do some reflections. This is a different model. So this model says we're gonna all start at the table together. We're gonna get to know each other. We're gonna understand each other's expertise. And then we're gonna work together to create a thing that none of us owns individually. So on one day I might have this idea and I've been thinking about it all weekend, I'm so excited, and it goes into the design and teachers try it, because they were excited and it didn't work. And then we come back and we change it. And I don't own the success of that idea or the failure, because together we're doing it. So it's an iterative process. You're collecting data, you're asking questions, you're in classrooms. Teachers are the ones usually trying stuff because they're the experts at teaching in their own classrooms. And then together we work and we modify things. So we did that process for a while. And Codesign is often a new way of working. So researchers are not used to sharing. like that. And teachers are also not always used to being valued as experts in something that they are expert in. So it was really new for all of us, even those of us that had done co-design before. So the progression of our project, in the summer, we developed our co-design team. So we asked teachers to join who were interested in participating in co-design and in new ways of thinking about teaching. They didn't have to be experts in project-based learning. They just had to be interested in doing this work. We spent the first 3 years developing this year-long course, the iterative design I just mentioned, and then we were also developing and testing measures. So how do we actually measure what's happening in classrooms? And for example, how do you measure critical thinking in a student? So that's one of the questions that we've been thinking about trying to measure. And as we started to see themes developing, so one of the themes that developed right away was, my kids are collaborating more. I really, really think that's key to what we're doing, is we're shifting the participation structures in class. So then we wanted to develop a measure that would ask kids, if teachers are saying they're collaborating more and we go in and see it, what are the kids saying about what it means to collaborate? So are we getting into sharing ideas? Do they feel like people are helping them? Do they like it? Do they think the groups are effective? Those are all the kinds of things that we were doing in the measurement stage. We have run 2 quasi-experimental designs. So in year 3, we started with a new group of teachers, and we started to teach them the materials and start to think about, what does co-design mean when something's already been developed? So how do we bring that into our professional learning model? And then this year, we're in 2 states, which was a midway requirement of our funder, Lucas Education Research, said, oh, and by the way, we would like one of your sites to be in a different state. So we're in Michigan, in and around the Flint, Michigan area, which we wanted to have a different demographic. We don't have a lot of African American students in Colorado. The 2 districts we looked at were Oakland Unified in California and Genesee County in Michigan, and Michigan was the one that was ready for us. And then we're moving into, so this will be our last, the study will be ending in the spring, and then we'll be working for about half a year. We have a no-cost extension for data analysis and dissemination. So I normally wouldn't get into the details of what the course is, but I just want you to know, since we all spent 3 years developing it, I think you should know a little bit about what it is. So this is kind of maybe the fun part for some of us, to get into what were these teachers and students actually do. So we call this our design criteria, and we use this model that we developed and revised along the way, both in our data collection and our analysis, and in the design of the course. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. So we have a social and emotional learning component in the 4 areas that we focus on. Remember, this is 9th grade language arts. So everything also has to be aligned to standards and what kinds of academic skills kids are working on at that grade level in that area. So we focus on caring, advocacy, perspective taking, and empathy. The box on the bottom is related to project-based learning. So these are core components of project-based learning, and we have adapted them a little bit to a fit in language arts. Authentic making, things are challenge or question driven. There's collaboration, feedback, revision, and reflection cycles. And it culminates in a product or performance that is for a real audience, so somebody other than the teacher. So no longer are you just writing something and handing it into the teacher and getting a grade. This is something that's bigger, and kids know that right from the start. We have an attention in our design to emergent bilingual learners, so I'm not going to read through this list, but you'll see how honoring students' linguistic repertoire through their learning activities is part of our thinking, part of how we developed it, and also how we support teachers. The course now consists of 4 projects. 2 would happen in the fall, and 2 would happen in the spring. And it's around this overarching question of, how is the world composed for us? How are the messages that we received impacting how we think, how we live, how we feel about ourselves? And how can we compose the world? How can we remix some of those messages so that we are creating the world that we actually want to live in. So we have a project, the first one is called Remix Our World. It's where kids get oriented to project-based learning, to working with each other. And just as an example, the authentic audience in that first project is the class. Just sharing with other students, and we hear so much. Ashley Potvin in the back there works very closely with our Michigan teachers. And those teachers, a lot of them are not used to having kids get to know each other. So those are classrooms where sometimes it's April and the kids don't know their names yet. In our classrooms, they do know their names because they learned them in that first project. And just sharing was really hard for a lot of the kids and a lot of the teachers. The next, what happened here, I'll talk a little bit more about, and the final product is a digital story that students create. Right now, many of our teachers are in the Unearthing Humanity project, where they explore the question, what does it mean to be human? And as an example of the iteration, this used to be, the essential question of this project used to be, what kind of hero do you want to see in the world? And what kids told us is, what that question really is, what kind of hero do you want me to see in the world? They felt like it was a known answer questions. The teachers were imposing their ideas about who should be a hero and expanding notions of hero. And everybody, teachers and students, love this question. What does it mean to be human? Which might encompass what kind of hero do you want to see in the world? But it's not a known answer question. Because if I asked everybody here, you'd answer really differently, just like the kids do. And the last one is changing the conversation. How can we change the conversation about issues that are important to us? The kids in that one, they choose a topic that they're interested in. They also now choose their audience. Who needs to hear my message? They create a survey and they do research on something that's important to teens. All right, so here's an example project. What happened here? All of our projects start with a launch, which is an engaging, exciting activity that also models where kids are going. So it introduces the essential question. It introduces the role that kids are going to be taking on. It could be filmmaker in this, storyteller. And it gets them launched. So here the kids have this big activity. They see lots and lots of models of digital stories. Then they do a lot of writing. So they're starting to pursue their own stories. They're being asked to write about their neighborhood, an important event, a person, all different kinds of things. And then they narrow it down into a story that they feel is worth telling. And then they learn about the different skills that are involved in storytelling, both in writing and in media. So this is one student's, this is sort of like 3/4 of the way in the project when she's starting to storyboard what her digital story is going to be. And here is the culminating film festival. In most schools, it's an afternoon or an evening event or even multiple events where parents, sometimes community members, other classrooms, siblings can come in and really celebrate all of the amazing stories that the kids have created. And I am going to take the time to show you two. I should look at my notes. So this story was written by a girl. I'm not going to tell you anything about it other than after she showed her film at the film festival, her parents were crying. They said, we never heard her talk about it this way. The students were saying to her, I didn't know this happened to you, because the surgery had happened. It's about surgery in middle school, and they were all new in high school. They didn't even know this important thing had happened. And then I'll tell you about the next ones.
When I was in 7th grade, I was diagnosed with scoliosis and was told that I was going to need surgery to fix it. At first, I was under the impression that the only reason I would get surgery would be for cosmetic reasons, but I found out later that not getting surgery wasn't an option. When I was diagnosed with scoliosis, I had around a 56-degree curve in the upper part of my spine, and right before my surgery, I had close to a 70-degree curve in my upper spine. It took only about 10 months for my scoliosis to progress that much. I didn't realize how much pain my scoliosis caused me until after my surgery. It made exercising extremely unpleasant and standing up for long amounts of time hard to bear. I had spinal fusion surgery in June 2016, the summer before 8th grade. 7th grade had been a huge year for me, and the summer of 2016 was a time of recovery for me in a physical and mental sense. I was well prepared for the physical recovery from surgery, but not for the emotional recovery I would have to go through. Not being able to do anything for yourself for a little over 2 weeks makes you feel utterly helpless. When you can't even go to the bathroom by yourself at 13, you feel like a failure, a disappointment. Even though you know it isn't your fault, even though you know that if you wouldn't have had this surgery, you wouldn't be alive today, the feeling of being a burden sticks. My friends and family were relieved that the surgery had gone well and I was fine, and they were completely ready to support me in any way that I needed. Body-wise, I had and still have a hard time coping with my scar. A lot of my scar and some of the skin surrounding my scar is still numb, which is hard for me to accept and deal with sometimes, but I manage and I know it'll only continue to get better.
So you can imagine these ninth graders coming in at the beginning of the year, not knowing each other's names and not wanting to share anything. And by November, December, they're telling these really incredible deep stories. Not everybody does, but this girl did, and a lot of the kids do. We have different themes that kids share. And then they are taught to give each other feedback, to ask each other questions. So these beautiful film festivals where the children are actually modeling for the parents how to give really targeted direct feedback is amazing. And that's something we've worked on over the years. That was a struggle for teachers at first, is to manage the feedback that kids and adults were giving each other. This next story is a little bit long, but we made a team decision to honor the filmmaker who told this story. And it's really different because she's talking about her neighborhood. And so the other student told a story she had never told before. Listen to this student's excitement as she talks about her neighborhood and some of the devices she uses to get her excitement across to her audience.
I was born in a small area called Aldea Xneconop from San Pedro Soloma, Tzuluma, Huehuetenango, Guatemala. I lived there almost my whole life, until my sweet 15 years old. When I was 5 years old, I lived with my grandparents. Then I moved there when I was 11 years old. My grandma's name is Lorenza, but I like to call her Mama Lolen. And my grandpa's name is Leon, but I like to call him Papa Leon because he's a lion. He looks scary and serious, but he's a really nice abuelo. When I was living with them, I live in a small, beautiful, and fresh area. My neighborhoods were my whole family. Some of them live far away, but I have like 80% living in the same area. The house of my Papa Leon is not too big, but it's a size for 9 peoples, and it's like a big square. The color is white, gray, and red. But the most thing that I like there is the view. It is so beautiful there. I really like the smell of the nachos in the mornings. The smell is like being in a fresh river. Then we can see the bright sun. The lights every down. Also every down you could see the smoke from the chimney of the relatives and see who's already got up in the morning. Then we can hear the sing of the little tiny beautiful birds. And then where I live there, the houses are surrounded by beautiful and tall, strong trees and a lot of animals too. My Papa Leon likes to plant flowers, and a lot of people come to our house to buy the flowers of my Papa Leon. And then the flowers of my Papa Leon are very beautiful. They are like colorful candies, like caramels that somebody wants to eat it. And the smell is like a perfume. Oh my god, it's so good. But my Papa Leon had a greenhouse. And if you want to enter the greenhouse, you have to sacrifice yourself. And how? Because there is like a desert, and oh my god, if you are cold, it's the best place where you want to be. It is necessary to sacrifice yourself because my Papa Leon says that to keep the flowers beautiful and smelly, we have to cover them. Because when the ark of Noah comes, when the skies turn gray or when the rains fall from the sky, the flowers will be protected. In my neighborhoods or in the area where I live, always rain because the weather there is like most of the time rainy because it's watermelon. What I liked the most about there was seeing people shearing their sheep, may or seeing beautiful horses, rooster, pigs, peacocks, ducks, etc. There are many animals there because the place is very green almost most of the time. I really love my neighborhood because it is fresh and warm. I really love my country.
So the risk that it took for Ellie to share this story, that she is in a high school in Windsor, Colorado. And if you're familiar with Windsor, you'll know that there are maybe 5 or 6 bilingual students in the entire school. And so telling her story, being able to share it with her classmates and with the community was so important, and she was so she's shared. Did it get shared yet? Yeah. Just got shared this week. She's so excited to be able to share this amazing story. And it's no small thing, by the way, to create these digital stories. I don't know if anyone's done it, but putting the sound, the music, and they have to write the whole script. So it's a writing project. And here's one more student talking about his experience. Oops. It's a little quiet.
How hands-on it is and how it's pretty unique. Because like with essays, because that's normally what English classes do. With essays, like I just can't write essay. As simple as that. Every essay I've ever tried to write, it just is horrid. I fail. Simple as that. I've never gotten a good grade on an essay. But this, it was just kind of, got across the same ideas, but it was just better.
So he doesn't exactly realize that he wrote the essay in order to make his video. So yay! So he was really excited about that. It's just better. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the teacher support. I'm watching my time. I may have to cut a few things. So here are a couple of quotes. This is us this summer in Flint. And a couple of teachers. This whole undertaking has been by far the most meaningful and authentic professional development I've done. I am very, very excited about starting school this year. Maybe this will be the thing that stops me from counting down the years to retirement. So we know that we have to have strong instruction in order for kids to grow, but if we can't have engaged and interested teachers who feel good about what they do, it really doesn't matter what curriculum, what instructional methods we have, because it's not gonna work. So the fact that teachers are feeling reinvigorated and reengaged is really amazing to us. Here's our sort of working theory of change. So teachers are feeling supported and inspired in the classroom. They have the right tools to be successful. Their experience in the community with other teachers values them as professionals, as experts, and as humans. So those are kind of like, you've got to have those. What comes out of that, once those things are in place? Students increase engagement, social and emotional and academic outcomes. The research practice partnerships develop and teachers become leaders. So a lot of times when we're talking about research practice partnerships, it's this thing that gets developed first, and then people sit around a table and they develop a shared problem of practice, and then they go do the work. In our experience, that research practice partnership develops along the way, and it develops as people start to see evidence that what we're doing works. You can't just sort of plan forward in terms of the research practice partnership. So that's why I've got, even though these are cyclical, they feed, all of these things feed each other, I think the placement of the research practice partnership is important. And then we are hoping that these project-based learning practices, or whatever practices you all are using, are refined and spread, and this community that you've developed grows. So it can grow across states, it can grow across schools, or even just across classrooms. We have a lot of teachers who say, I worked at this school for 15 years, I've never collaborated with this other English teacher who teaches 9th grade also. For us, in terms of our professional development, we think it needs to be pretty substantial. There's a lot to learn. So we have a 4-day design institute in the summer. We have monthly cohort sessions. The majority of those are online. So Ashley, this is one that she was running with our group of teachers in Michigan. And we're playing around with the right number of teachers for those monthly cohort sessions. If there's too many, it doesn't seem to work. If there's too few, as you all know, running groups, there's not enough discussion. So we have a couple that happen with our teachers in Michigan and a couple that happen with our teachers here in Colorado. And then every time they start a new project, we do a full day professional learning session to get them ready and to allow them to customize and plan for what it's going to look like in their own classroom. We ask teachers a lot of questions. We collect a lot of data. We think it also helps them reflect and think about themselves. So this is a check-in that we do at the end of PD that we also do with students periodically. And we just ask them, over the course of the Institute, check all that apply. And you can see the ones that are in the 90s, I felt accepted, I felt welcomed, I felt excited, I felt inspired, I felt productive. And you also see that teachers do feel overwhelmed. They do feel rushed sometimes. And so then we talk to them, if you give something like this to your students, what do you do with that information once you find that your kids are all over the place, that the majority of them are feeling great, but some of them are feeling really frustrated and like things aren't working? So we collect a lot of data for our study this year. In terms of classroom enactment, we have observations with an observation checklist we developed and extensive field notes. We have teacher instructional logs that we've developed and we're piloting this year where teachers complete them 3 times a year for 3 days in a row. We feel like this is less invasive and we're trying to see if it matches what an in-person observation does. It also gives you a little bit more of an extended picture rather than just that snapshot when you drop in for a day. If the teachers are reporting what they did for 3 days, we feel like we can get a little bit of a better sense of what's happening. We ask a lot from teachers in terms of their perceptions of the course and how their students are learning and how they're feeling. We also talk to students. So we have the surveys I mentioned, we interview students, we do those practical measure class checks, and then we have some academic outcomes. We'll be looking at the PSAT 9. We have an argument writing task that we have modified from the NAEP writing task. And then we also look at student work. That's a lot. One of the things that is really important when we have so much data that we're collecting and so many questions that we're trying to answer is we have done this data construct mapping. So we've been doing this from the start. As we started to develop those design principles, we want to see where do we expect to see evidence that those design principles are actually happening. So in our observation checklist, questions 1 through 8 support authentic making. In our instructional log, we also have questions. The panorama is a social and emotional learning survey given to students. That one doesn't measure anything with authentic making. So we need to be aware of what our measures are measuring and what they're not measuring. And you could go down this long list to see the other things. So if anyone wants to talk later about developing this or how it's working, it's a really nice way to check for us. How do we know what data we're collecting and what we're able to see? And I'm going to do about 5 more minutes. Do you think I'm okay with that? So I want to just give you a few of our results from our last year's study. So that was our first pilot study with teachers who had not participated in the co-design development. So we can't just develop every single time we want to teach something in the classroom. We have to be able to move it to new teachers. Overall, Cal teachers reported positive shifts in pedagogy and their ideas about student engagement. They felt that projects helped students make real-world connections, that they were engaging and fun, they developed creativity, collaboration, and helped kids develop relevant communication skills. Students had ownership and choice, and I'm not sharing right now our student data, but a lot of this is mirrored in what students have to say. Students and teachers expanded their notions of what it means to read, and they took risks, kids and teachers, in learning and in their teaching practices. And there were challenges. So there was a big tension between project-based learning and teaching traditional language arts skills. So we're trying to answer this question: how much PBL do you need in order to be able to have a classroom shift in these positive ways, but still have teachers feel like they're able to meet the goals and the standards that they're required to teach? There was just a lack of time to fit everything in. It was hard work to learn new stuff. Teachers told us it wasn't any harder than learning anything else new that you're teaching, but it's hard to learn new things. And there were fewer comments about our SEL components in our universal design for learning components, and probably because we spent so much time on project-based learning, and SEL we can talk about a little bit more later. Teachers may not have recognized some of the things that they were doing that were developing kids' social and emotional learning. Teachers who taught 3 or more projects had higher adherence to the Codesign principles. And we did have some failures. So we did have a couple of schools where teachers were given limited time to plan. The school climate and culture was very challenging, and they had difficulty taking up the new practices and working together with each other and also working together with us. And the reality is some teachers just aren't into project-based learning. It just might never be their thing, and I think that's important for us to realize too. We have to be honest, we're never going to find anything that everybody likes. So what are our next steps and the inquiry that we're looking at? Because this is a multidisciplinary team, because we have so many team members with different interests, which makes us so strong, I just wanted to share a few of the research questions that different team members are pursuing, and I'm just listing the lead author. So I'm looking at how do students with disabilities perceive their learning and engagement in a project-based learning environment compared to students without disabilities. This is super interesting. Talk to me about it later. I'm really excited about the way kids are framing how they learn. Carla Skornavaco is very interested in teacher leadership, so she is looking at how, and with others, how does the co-design process help to develop teachers as leaders in their schools and communities. Ashley Potvin did a dissertation study, which one of her questions, what did one teacher's caring for students reveal about the emotional dimensions of participation in improvement science? And I just asked, will you just quickly say just a little bit about your dissertation study or how you got it going?
Sure. So my dissertation study took place in our year 2, where we were kind of in the middle of co-designing the curriculum, and we spent a lot of time talking about the curriculum and the stuff that teachers were teaching. And as I was talking to teachers, there were a few teachers who wanted to talk a little bit more about their actual students in their classroom. There just didn't seem to be, like, sometimes we didn't have enough time to do all of the things. And so I worked on a co-design project where I invited teachers who are already part of Compose Our World. So I worked with a small subset of teachers, and they volunteered, so it was additional to what they were already doing on our project. And broadly, I said, I want to do something around responsive teaching practices and your students. And the teachers who signed up said, we really want to focus on our relationships with students, that we feel like we could really improve our relationships with students, and that would help our classroom community, and it would help student engagement in the projects and the curriculum. And so we worked on designing a very small opening class routine focused on teacher-student relationships. We collected some survey data and we looked at it together, and so I studied what happened in that process and what happened when teachers talked about their data around their relationships with students.
So thank you, and Ashley's now a postdoc on our project, but one of the most amazing things in the connections with this dissertation work is we took a lot of the findings from Ashley's study and incorporated that into our materials, and that strengthened our course for sure. Christina Stamatis, who is another doc student here in Learning Sciences, is looking at why does the way we tell stories matter, and she has modified one of our projects to have more writing and go across, actually I think almost a year, and is working closely with one teacher on on that for her dissertation. Erin Guggenheim, a doc student in literacy, is one of the many things he's looking at. What are the affordances for students and teachers in adapting a digital narrative inquiry project to support narrative expression? So this is an adapted version of what happened here, the project I talked about earlier. And Bridget Dalton is looking at how do teachers expand notions of text in ELA, including digital texts. And Joe Pullman and others are looking at authenticity specifically. What does authenticity mean to teachers and students, and how is it presenting itself, and what are the impacts? We have what's next for us. We just, this week, yesterday, the day before yesterday, I can't remember, got an Enabling Conditions grant, and I'm really excited about this grant. It's an early career grant, so most of the work is going to be done by Ashley. That's what they wanted. But you never really get the time and space and funds to look at sustainability and to look at the conditions really closely that make this stuff work. So most of what we're going to be doing is doing a retrospective look at how teachers have changed over time, what's happening in schools in relation to our work, and then moving that forward to think about how our understanding of enabling conditions can prepare us to more fully address issues of equity in PBL partnerships. Because I think I could say that our funders maybe first thought that we should just go to the schools that were already ready for change, and we weren't interested in those schools. We didn't want to only work in those schools. We wanted to work in all schools with all teachers and all kids. So we're really excited about that work. And we're also right now in negotiation with CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic and Social and Emotional Learning, to do like a collaboratory project, they call it, with CASEL and CU and Lucas Education Research. And we're hoping to go into schools, most likely in Chicago, that are already focusing on social and emotional learning, and to see if schools are already positioned in that way, how are they doing when they integrate project-based learning, because there's such a synergy between those pieces. But a lot of the SEL work has happened separate from content and academics. It happens in an advisory period or an after-school club kind of thing. So we want to get it into the language arts classrooms more specifically. And that really, I went a little bit too long, I'm sorry, but if there are any questions or if anybody wants to just add anything, I would so welcome your feedback. Thank you. Yes.
So this is great.
Thank you.
I feel like we hear about Composer World all the time, and I haven't really fully understood what's happening. So thank you so much for sharing. I have so many questions about like how the relationships start. So, I think a lot of us are thinking about like how do you have more horizontal relationships between researchers and teachers, between teacher educators and teachers, because you all are operating as teacher educators
Yes.
in this too, right?
Yep.
So it's like, so a lot of it's co-design, but like where do you start? Like I don't know if the word's appropriate, but like what do you come with, and what do you co-design, and what are you learning about like what helps that relationship feel really horizontal and collaborative?
Yes, it's a great question. It matters what you're doing with the teachers and with the group. So I actually think developing the relationships to design the course was easier than once we had designed the course and we were developing relationships to implement the course in schools. And we made some mistakes. So I will say that in year 3, in the districts we were in, we were so excited about working with different kinds of schools that we didn't stick to what we knew were sort of the base for what needed to happen in order to get the work done. So an example is, as a requirement, we know already that we need a certain number of days of PD. So we can be a little bit flexible, but I remember being in situations where we said we're going to do 4 days of PD in the summer and 3 throughout the year. And the administrator said, that's going to be too much for us. You know, the teachers are really bogged down. They don't have any planning periods. You know, we could maybe do this many half days. And I said, okay, because I knew they needed this, or I thought, You know, I thought they needed, I mean, all those words are the wrong words to even be saying in a row. And so we went in, and it turns out that it wasn't a good fit because the teachers didn't have enough time to work together, and they didn't have the support that we thought they had from the administration. So as we also had it as a criteria that teachers would want to do the work, that they were already kind of interested. When we talked about the projects, it sounded interesting to them, that they had, you know, reasons to want to make some shifts in the classroom. In this one school in particular, we didn't realize that they said yes because they were like, well, the principal asked us, and of course we had to say yes. So people use that like cliche, voluntold. This was not apparent to us. So when I went in for year 4, I didn't tell those stories exactly, but I said to people, we want to have a relationship, we want to adapt, we want to learn what you're doing, but we got to do it together. And if they said, you know, oh yeah, I really want to do it, but we don't have any planning time, then I said, well, let's wait for a year. Another thing I did was I visited every single school, and I asked the people in the school district to take me into all of the potential classrooms. I didn't want any cherry pick. I just wanted to get a feel for the school, and they did that, and that really helped us because it helped us in our planning. It helped us when we were working with teachers to understand what the vibe of the school was like and what the kids were like. So I think backing up and having a little bit more time to develop the relationships is really important, but also kind of holding fast to whatever it is that you think you're going to need to make it happen, and and learning what they need to make it happen. So if they're motivated purely by test scores, like, you know, we're a failing school, we're in the red, we need to show growth on PSAT 9 next year, we're gonna, you know, that's not the right space for this kind of relationship. And if we're not able to help them in the way that they need to be helped, then we might have to say, let's wait, you know, I don't know, that's like a little small. Thank you. Lori?
It's so awesome. Thank you. So my question is about a different relationship, which is the relationship between the project-based learning and the rest of the instruction.
Yes.
And I have a bias, which is, you know, hoping that teachers would mediate for students the relationship between the school learning. I'm thinking more from science about, you know, what does doing school look like? Why has it been so painful? And how is any of what we have to do made more relevant or more relatable to who you are as a person because you're immersed in doing these projects?
So, if I understand your question, you're asking how is the teacher able to mediate that? First, the teacher has to feel it. So that's the part that we notice. So, for example, we have a lot of explicit and embedded skills, but we made a decision, we played around with this in our earlier designs of, for example, how much of the writing process for an argument essay were we going to include in our materials? Because we knew that there was going to be some explicit instruction that was likely needed in order to write this persuasive letter, whatever it was going to be, that was going to go to the school board. Teachers told us, I'm a language arts teacher. I don't need you to tell me how to teach plot or how to teach argumentative writing. And it was bogging down the materials. There was so much stuff in there. So we peeled back on that and we added a lot of it in as supports. You know, if you want to learn more about argument writing, you know, read these extra supports, or if you have students with disabilities or kids who are learning English. But that's a tension we're still playing with, because one of the things we notice is, for example, teachers will get to the end of what happened here and they'll say there really wasn't much writing. When we're in the classrooms and we can see and the kids are telling us that they're doing way more writing, but what they mean when they say writing is like teaching a writing lesson, like here's how you write a topic paragraph. And so that's something that, and jump in if you want to, Ashley, that's something that we're really working on, is how to, in our professional learning sessions, making it more explicit for teachers so that they can decide, do I need to teach it more explicitly, or recognizing it when it's embedded. And that was a little bit of a surprise to us. The other big one is text integration. So to be an English teacher means I teach the Odyssey. And teaching the Odyssey means I hand out a packet and the kids read it and they fill out the thing, and at the end they do a quiz every week. So I'm going to do project-based learning by splitting my block and doing half Odyssey packet, and then we're going to talk about what it means to be human. And the kids are like, wait a minute. So we're really playing around with teachers, puzzling through that. That's a really amazing way to think about curriculum as co-design. So rather than us going in and saying, this is what fidelity means. Our research tells us that if it's authentic, the kids are going to learn more. And to be authentic, you have to integrate everything. What we've said to teachers is, okay, we know this is like a challenge. Let's all get together and think about how it might look in your classroom. And you know what? It looks different if you're reading the Odyssey than if you're reading The Life of Pi, than if you're doing lit circles, than if you're reading nonfiction. But we can sit down together and start to build out these different options. And then the teachers share them with each other. We can say, hey, you had a really great way for integrating To Kill a Mockingbird. Can you share that at our next professional development? Or, you're in an inclusion classroom and we have this other teacher who's also teaching inclusion who really had to slow down the pace. Let's, have a meeting together and talk about how she did that. Other questions? Comments? I may have talked too long.
That's perfect. Yeah, so good.
You might think, what about kids who need extra support? I'll just plug that. Yeah. What about that? So there is this idea of a word that I don't say very well, but the word is educative materials. How much support for instruction can you provide in a lesson plan? Because I'm just going to tell you, if the lesson plan is 20 pages, teachers are not going to read it. So how do you talk to teachers about using, for example, discussion stems? If there are a lot of kids who are unfamiliar with how to have a discussion or how to give feedback. And a couple of ways that we have been working on this, and some we're still developing, and we hope in this next project that's going to be even more of a focus, is we do have some protocols that we use that Ashley has worked on quite a bit. So we have a feedback protocol where the kids learn how to present, an idea that they've had, just kind of like what we did for those that were in the faculty meeting on Wednesday. We use those kinds of protocols with kids where they present their problem, whatever it is, their thing, they ask a question, the group gives them feedback. And they're not very good at it in the beginning, just like adults actually aren't. But we can watch sometimes, even through a lesson, the initial feedback that's going to the group is a little bit weak, and then kids get the swing of it, and then by the end, and then the teacher can build on those structures. So we have a series of protocols, one for feedback, one for doing a design sprint, so that's working together to come up with ideas really quickly. What reflection protocols? What else do we have?
Developing criteria.
Developing criteria for the final product. And all of those protocols and our materials, as much as possible without having additional lessons, have supports embedded in them. And what we're finding, no surprise to people here, is that they're working for all students. So they might be particularly essential for an emergent bilingual learner in order to engage and have participation in discussion, and everybody's discussion skills are growing, and the participation is more equitable just in general when you have those supports and those protocols. Any other thoughts or pushbacks? Well, thank you for coming at Lunchtime.